Param vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam. Total world victory of Hare Krishna. My name is Sitapati Das, and this is Bhagavad-gita 2:15. Bhagavad-gita As It Is, Chapter 2, Sankhya Yoga, text number 15. Yam hina vyathayantyete puruṣaṁ puruṣarṣabha sama-duḥkha-sukhaṁ dhīram mṛtatvāya kalpate. Yam, one who, he, certainly, na, never, vyathayanti, are distressing, ete, all these, puruṣam, to a person, puruṣarṣabha, is best among men, sama, unaltered, dukkha, distress, sukham, happiness, dhīram, patient, saha, he, amṛtatvāya, for liberation, kalpate, is considered eligible. Translation. O best among men, Arjuna, the person who is not disturbed by happiness and distress and is steady in both is certainly eligible for liberation. Purport. Anyone who is steady in his determination for the advanced stage of spiritual realization and can equally tolerate the onslaughts of distress and happiness is certainly a person eligible for liberation. In the varṇāśrama institution, the fourth stage of life, namely the renounced order, sannyāsa, is a painstaking situation. But one who is serious about making his life perfect surely adopts the sannyāsa order of life, in spite of all difficulties. The difficulties usually arise from having to sever family relationships to give up the connection of wife and children. But if anyone is able to tolerate such difficulties, surely his path to spiritual realization is complete. Similarly, in Arjuna's discharge of duties as a kṣatriya, he is advised to persevere even if it is difficult to fight with his family members or similarly beloved persons. Lord Caitanya took sannyāsa at the age of 24, and his dependents, young wife as well as old mother, had no one else to look after them. Yet for a higher cause, he took sannyāsa and was steady in the discharge of higher duties. That is the way of achieving liberation from material bondage. Om jnana-timirandasya jnananjana shalakaya chakshur unmilitam yena tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Okay, let's have a look at changes between the first and the so-called second edition. So in the varṇāśrama, so there's one comma that's been added here. In the varṇāśrama institution, the fourth stage of life, namely the renounced order, sannyāsa, it's a dependent clause, a subordinate clause. And then dependants has been changed to dependents. Some changes in the word for word. Samritai, so amrita. It's 14. Let's have a look at this one. Mṛtatvāya kalpate. Okay. Not sure what's changed there. A space, maybe. One who has changed to whom. To whom? To whom it may concern. Puruṣarṣabha. In distress and happiness. Dukkha, distress. Sukham, happiness. In distress and happiness. Okay, let's have a look at the original manuscript. Puruṣarṣabha, the best among men. Sukham, happiness. Dukkha, distress. Happiness, distress, and then in the changed version, in distress and happiness. This particular change, conclusion, not closer to the manuscript, not closer to Prabhupada. Let's read it in Prabhupada's original manuscript. Anyone who is steady in his determination for the advanced stage of spiritual realization and can equally tolerate the onslaughts of distresses and happinesses is certainly the person eligible for liberation. In the institution of varṇāśrama system, the fourth stage of life, namely the renounced order, is a painstaking situation. But one who is serious about making his life perfect surely adopts the sannyāsa order of life in spite of all difficulties. The difficulties are not for his living conditions, but the difficulties are to cut off family relationships and give up the connection of wife and children. You know, when I read this purport, I think of when Srila Prabhupada wrote this, and where he was speaking from, because of course he had taken the sannyāsa order himself and gone to America. This was the second time that he wrote this Bhagavad-gita, because the first manuscript got stolen, so he wrote it again. So this could have been in the first one, so it could have been written way earlier than that. It's interesting that he says the difficulties are not for his living conditions, but the difficulties are to cut off family relationships and give up the connection of wife and children. It's actually in the edited version into the first edition, it's been softened in a way. It says the difficulties usually arise from having to sever family relationships to give up the connection of wife and children. Here, Srila Prabhupada says, the difficulties are not for his living conditions, but the difficulties are to cut off family relationships to give up the connection of wife and children. I can imagine him speaking from his personal realization of his situation. Yeah, okay, my living situation is whatever it is, wherever he was living at the time when he first wrote this, whether it was in the Radha Damodar temple or whether it was in the Lower East Side, somewhere in America. And he's thinking, my living conditions are not great, but the thing that I really miss or that really hits me is the cutting off the family relationships to give up the connection of wife and children. But if anyone is able to tolerate such difficulties, surely his path to spiritual realization is complete. Therefore, in the discharge of duties by Arjuna as a kṣatriya, he is advised to tolerate, even if there is some difficulty, in the matter of fighting with his family members or similarly affectionate persons. Lord Caitanya took sannyāsa at the age of 24, and his dependents, young wife as well as old mother, had nobody else to look after them. Yet for a higher cause, he took sannyāsa and was steady in the discharge of higher duties. That is the way of achieving liberation from material bondage. So, in this purport, Srila Prabhupada compares the situation of Arjuna on the battlefield and sannyāsa. He's talking about also being eligible for being liberated. He's talking about the institution of the varṇāśrama system. The essential idea of this verse is that one who's not disturbed by happiness and distress, transcendental to them, steady in both, certainly this person is eligible for being liberated. So that applies to, why is Krishna saying that to Arjuna on the battlefield? Because Arjuna is not in the sannyāsa order of life. Later, Arjuna will explain that sannyāsa means renouncing the fruits of action. So one does not become motivated for or against some course of action due to the consequences. One becomes motivated by duty. And then Srila Prabhupada contrasts these two things, that Arjuna's central crux of his struggle is his attachment to his family members. His family is on both sides. Family will be impacted for generations by this battle. So Arjuna's material attachment to his family is what's keeping him from doing his duty. And then Srila Prabhupada, as a sannyasi, has cut off his connection to his family completely. And then he gives the example of Arjuna, and then the example of Lord Caitanya, who took sannyasa at the age of 24. And he had a wife. It was his second wife. He had an elderly mother, Sachi. His wife, Vishnupriya, Lakshmipriya. I think Lakshmipriya was his first wife, and Vishnupriya was his wife at the time that he took sannyas. And then he took sannyas and gave up that attachment. So Srila Prabhupada's speaking from his own personal realization here, for sure. Yeah. Yam hina vyathayanty ete puruṣarṣabha. Sama-duḥkha-sukhaṁ dhīram. Sama-duḥkha-sukhaṁ dhīram. Sama-duḥkha-sukhaṁ dhīram. It's SD. Sama-duḥkha-sukhaṁ dhīram. Mṛtatvāya kalpate. Eligible to drink the soma ras. He amṛtatvāya. Amrit means deathless, without death. So he's eligible to pass beyond the realm of material bondage, as Srila Prabhupada calls it here. So this idea that fighting and renouncing everything are the same thing on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, it's like a inconceivable, mind-bending thing to get. But this is the theme that will be developed in Bhagavad-gita by Krishna. Contemporary application. You know, happiness and distress, they appear whether you want them or not. And sometimes you'll be happy, sometimes you won't. Sometimes you'll be sad. But a person who's not disturbed by that and is steady in both, just keeps on keeping on, is certainly eligible for liberation. Well, how do you actually get to that stage of being transcendental to both? Because, you know, oftentimes what you do is you read something like this, you know it, you heard it, and then you're like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I've got to do this class earlier tomorrow. Yeah, definitely. And actually tomorrow I have a conversation with Sridhar Srinivasa, who is, he comes from a family of Tamil Vaishnavas in South India. They've been worshipping Shalagram Shila for 300 years. They're the real deal in terms of like a traditional grounded. And he's coming on to talk about his book, which is called Female Diksha Gurus, Why Do We Need Them? Or Do We Need Them? Can't remember which. Do we need them? Yeah, something like that. Anyway, he's going to tell all about it tomorrow. And then we're going to discuss something that's very interesting to me, which is the pragmatic pathway from where we are now to varṇāśrama. Okay, contemporary application. Yeah, how do you get to that platform? Because oftentimes you just like kind of soldier through it until you kind of collapse. You know, and it's kind of like, oh, I couldn't artificially do it. I mean, Arjuna's on this battlefield here, and he could listen to this conversation, this coaching from Krishna, and then go, okay, I'm going to do it, but then like collapse partway through. And in actual fact, he does. During the battle, Krishna has to speak to him several times. It's lucky he had Krishna in the chariot with him to get him through it. So a key to this is constantly hearing. It's been like, I don't know, coming up to 2 months, I think, of doing Bhagavad-gita every day. And, I haven't missed a day yet. And there's just a power and consistency. And, it's whether you want to do it or not, which is part of this like happiness and distress, and being steady in both. But at the same time, there's another aspect to it, which is that by hearing transcendental sound vibration and by meditating on it. In one of the quotes that was on one edition of the Gita, it talked about bathing my consciousness every day in the cosmogonal philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. So bathing one's consciousness daily, repeatedly hearing the same message. Like I've been reading, reciting, studying Bhagavad Gita for like 25 years now, and it never fails to deliver, and it never fails to make a difference. Whereas just kind of reading it once and then leaving it, it would be difficult to remain steady in both happiness and distress. Yeah, they definitely come in equal degrees. Depending, according to your karma, you get them. So hearing is key. Depending on what you hear, what you lend your ears and your attention, your oral reception to, that will shape your consciousness. And whatever you meditate on, that determines what you become. That's described in Srimad Bhagavatam in several places. I think it's in the 7th or the 9th canto. It talks about a caterpillar that hides inside a tree, meditating on the wasp that's coming to kill it. And in that way, it becomes a wasp in its next life. But, that's like lifetime to lifetime. But even within this life, what we meditate on, what we hear about, that becomes our meditation, and that determines our destiny. So Arjuna on the battlefield, he hears this conversation from Krishna, and he hears it multiple times during the battle. And the amazing thing about it is that that same conversation is available to us in the form of the Bhagavad Gita. So the contemporary application of this verse and Bhagavad Gita itself is the same as the historical application of the Bhagavad Gita, which is hearing it makes a difference. And then hearing it multiple times makes the difference in making one steady in both happiness and distress, which is what's happening here. Is Arjuna is experiencing this unsteadiness and performing his duty. Krishna speaks Bhagavad Gita to him, and he becomes again fixed and performs his duty. But then he again becomes unsteady, and then Krishna speaks to him again, and then he again becomes fixed. And this is the way for us too, that we go through life. And if you want to be steady in both happiness and distress, there's no kind of magic moment or magic trick or formula or anything. The key to it is constantly hearing and chanting. Shout outs to Fenella. Hare Krishna, thanks for tuning in. I don't know if we can get this whole one in here. Yeah, we can. Amazing. Fenella says, I think Jesus gave up his family too, but in a different way. When he was attending something, a wedding, disciples came and said, your mother and brothers are here waiting for you. And Jesus said, here are all my mothers and brothers, pointing to the crowd. In this way, he still had association with his family, but saw them with the same love as he saw everyone else. They were not special, as our families are special to us. He loved all equally. Great. Yeah. Yeah, expanding that same love equally to all. And then at the same time, we may have some duty with respect to our family, And then sometimes our duty is, as we can see here, it goes against those familial kind of ties in terms of Arjuna fighting against his family on the battlefield, in terms of the sannyasi, Srila Prabhupada or Lord Caitanya, leaving the family to focus exclusively on spiritual life. But in all cases, whether one is engaged in family life, whether one is engaged with the material society in terms of participating in it, or whether one is aloof and speaking into it, as the sannyasi does, regardless of that, hearing and chanting is the key to achieving this steadiness. And I can't really comment on that pastime about Jesus because I'm not familiar with exactly which one that is. It has been a long time since I read the Bible, although I recently read Divine and Demoniac Nature, Divine or Demoniac, Spiritual Movements, The Infiltration of Spiritual Movements, something by Dhaneshwara Prabhu. And that has a whole section at the beginning about the history of the early church in Palestine, which was fascinating to read, and the parallels with the Hare Krishna movement in the 20th and 21st century. And we're going to have Dhaneshwara Das on the podcast on Sunday morning, New Zealand time, Sunday 10 a.m., and that's 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Saturday. Okay, a couple of shout-outs there for upcoming events. Let's go back to the verse. Yam hina vyathayanty puruṣaṁ puruṣarṣabha sama-duḥkha-sukhaṁ dhīraṁ mṛtatvāya kalpate. O best among men, Arjuna, the person who is not disturbed by happiness and distress and is steady in both is certainly eligible for liberation. Param vijayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam, total world victory of Hare Krishna.